conduct the meeting tonight. Yeah.
I need to talk to people about the details of our show and the times and send around my sign-up sheets. So I
There you go.
There's nobody else on it.
Oh, okay. How's everybody doing? Yeah? Everybody have a good holiday season? Came back nice and rested? Ready for our great big show we're going to have at the end of the month here? That's going to be the primary aspect of what we're going to talk about today. I do want to make a brief announcement to start off that if you did order t-shirts for the society, you can pay for those in the back. We're going to ask that you wait until after kind of the presentation portion of the meeting when we're doing voting and the intermission, and then you can head back over there and make sure you pay for them. There are a couple extras that are available, so if you do want them, we did mention, we can't guarantee we have the right size and you're going to get the color you want, but at least there are some available back there if you are looking for some. Otherwise, we'll sell those probably during the show itself. Before we really get started on presentation, which I'm going to give today on putting together orchid displays and just generally preparing orchids for a show, Lynette is in charge of our show. She's our show chair, and we are very grateful for everything she does for this every year. But she's going to make sure we get wrangled and corralled here and get everybody signed up for all the responsibilities we need to take care of at the end of the month. So.
Okay, the schedule of events. The show is going to be pretty similar to the way it ran last year with the scheduling. The participants, the societies are the same that are coming in to set up exhibits. It's Central Missouri, which is Columbia, Memphis, Springfield, Missouri, Kansas City, and then St. Louis. So that'll be our society exhibits. Our vendors this year are Windy Hill Gardens, Nat's Orchids, Birds Botanicals, Equigenera, and 10 Shin Orchids is our new vendor for this year. It's really, we didn't get this all set up soon enough for them to do any pre-orders. But anyway, that's who's coming, so if you want to look
And
at it.
I will say on the side of that, they do similar to Equigenera. They ship in a lot of plants, and they are in bags, but they're in great quality. We picked up some in Ohio, and we're very happy with the quality of them.
Will it be those same two people, do you think?
Probably. I don't think we know exactly who they're sending.
I've been talking to Matthew.
Yeah, that was his name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Are any of them taking pre-orders? I was talking to them.
Equigenera was, now whether when the cutoff date is, I don't know, but you could check with them.
Okay.
And our local guys, Maryland probably.
Marilyn, are you taking pre-orders?
Birds and Nats.
Like, I could.
Right. Then for the schedule, Friday is our big work day. So those of you who signed up to be show volunteers, and I'll send this paper around again. Friday we'll have set up from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and that's when we need the most help from all of you, helping societies and vendors move their things in and get everything set up. So Friday is the big day where we need help. And then also Sunday at 5 o'clock when there's tear down. Everything goes really fast when at that tear down time because everybody's anxious to get their all their things put away and exit the botanical garden. Saturday, well, okay, so then Saturday morning, the judging is at 7 o'clock, so it'll be from 7 to 9. We'll have some breakfast for judges and clerks, so whoever would like to clerk is welcome. I'm going to send around actually, I ought to send all these sheets together because there's one pen.
I have more.
Okay. Yes, clerking is a lot of fun. If you'd like to participate, just sign up. You do have to be here at 6:45, but we'll have some food, some things to eat. So it's a lot of fun. It's very educational. Then our show and sales are open from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday and on Sunday. We have an information table that, for our society, that we need a few people to sit at, and a sales table. Friday evening, there's a garden member reception at 5:45, so 5:45 to 8:30. There's gonna be garden members coming through to view the show and the sales. So, our society will have a table selling some plants Friday during the day, and I don't know that we have anything left by Friday evening. Friday during the day, there's another garden member party. There's a preview party from 10 to 3, and that's when our society will have a table with, and sell a few plants. And also Birds Botanicals will be selling a few plants then too, during the setup time. Because during that time, the auditorium will be closed down to the public. For hospitality, I'll send around a sheet. Friday is our biggest day for providing food for people. We have all these people setting up exhibits and vendors coming in, setting up their booths. So we need to provide lunch and dinner on Friday. And if we could have like one main dish and then small sandwiches or sides to go with it, for each meal, that would be wonderful. Saturday, we'll have some breakfast for the clerks and judges in the morning, and then we'll have lunch for the vendors and the judges on Saturday afternoon. And then Sunday, we only have lunch for the vendors, and we will need to do to-go food for the travelers at teardown time at 5 p.m. Need one person who will take over that duty. So thank you all. We did wonderful last year with our hospitality.
Does anybody have questions as to what are good things to bring, or if you're interested in it but you don't really know what? Yeah.
In judging people who do the running, I found this out last year. It helps very much if you have a cell phone. You just take a picture of the tags or the thing, and you have them on your phone, and you can just look at them on your phone. You don't have to write down. You don't have to memorize. One of my guys did it last year, and he was so quick with it that we just whipped through so many different. You were our tag judge. We went
Yeah.
through.
Cool. Well,
I think, each judging team, there'll be like 3 judges on a team.
Right.
And that team will kind of decide
How
the
they're
order
gonna
of business for their team.
But it helps. It helped us a lot. It helped him a lot.
yeah.
And one judge will be in charge of
Like
each
that was
of
my
each
head
team.
dog. Did a very good job.
Thank you.
How do you put a plan forward to be judged?
So we will address that in a little bit here. So we'll get to that point. I want to stick with food and volunteering real quick. That's why I was just trying to make sure we addressed any questions that related to that.
Well, I do have, if you're going to bring plants in,
Yeah.
I do have plant tags.
Yeah.
And I do have a show schedule, which will tell you what class your plant will be in. And I have a sign-up sheet for an owner exhibitor letter. So if you're gonna bring plants in, sign your name and get yourself a letter, and then you can put that information on your tags.
Yeah.
Could you send the schedule, did you already do
It
that?
was on the,
Send
it wasn't
text.
with the
You
email.
mentioned so many dates, times and dates, and do you have that someplace written down?
It is in this document, that's the show schedule.
But do you have it on the
At the very
website or the
At the
newsletter
very
or anything
beginning,
like that?
it couldn't go,
Newsletter, right?
it didn't go in the newsletter.
It didn't go. Okay. So one thing I will say real quick on terms of comments, we're going to talk about registering or submitting plans for our display specifically, and we will send an email out for that. We can send the show schedule with it. The other thing to point out is that the show schedule, the way our submission online, if you've done that before, is set up, it also includes a link that will let you download the show schedule. And I will show you when I talk about that here in a minute, where you can kind of click on that link. But
I'm not talking about the show,
Schedule
about
events.
the registration.
Oh.
Times and food.
It's on the page 2, it's right after the
Should
cover.
go around.
It's on page 2
Yeah.
of the show schedule.
And send that link to the other society, whoever the contact person is in the societies, because they like to have that information ahead of time.
Have you've sent it out
The show
to?
schedule.
Yeah, you've sent out the show schedule to all the societies, right?
To the
Yeah,
societies,
yeah,
but I
the
didn't
societies
send
have
it to
it.
this,
Yeah.
this one because I
sent it
maybe
to,
go out
I
and
sent
send
it to our
but-
society.
He
It's
did.
in the email.
Okay, it's in the email. There we go. That's all we need to answer. It's in your last email that you guys should have gotten this week. It's attached.
But maybe you should show people how to get it.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
Clearly it didn't.
Click through.
There was a show schedule button.
Yes.
That takes you to that show schedule.
I'll pull it up here. Sorry, you can go through with it.
Does anybody have any questions?
So one thing I'll just add to that. So the things that she just reiterated for everybody, if you're new here, for our show, we have our setup, which is we need a lot of volunteers pretty much all day Friday from 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night. The main portion of that will be the really early time period at 9 to like noon or 2 o'clock, because that's when it's really, really busy on Friday. On Saturday, we will also, like she said, there should be a list going out if you wanted to clerk. On Saturday morning, you come in at
6:45 the
Six-
latest. We'll have food from 6:30 to 7. And judging actually starts at 7. So be here by 6:45 at the latest, because then we'll be putting people together in teams,
Yep.
judging teams.
So if you want to find out a little bit about more the judging process and looking at plants and breaking them down, that's a great time to come in and learn and be part of that. The rest of the day will be the show, and we're looking for people to provide breakfast and lunch appetizers from our society for the people that are running the show during that day. And then on Sunday, the show will be open all day. We're just providing lunch, but we're also providing to-go snacks and helping to break down for all the current societies that are here to make sure they can get on the road, because it happens at 5 o'clock, and most of them have to drive at least 4 hours or so to get home. So it's nice if we can get them out and on the road and out of there. The rest of the day will also be taken up that evening on just breaking down and cleaning up all of our stuff. So the Friday morning is a really strong volunteer time. Sunday afternoon is a really important time for volunteers. And then the things she sent out were the lists for sign up for food to bring. The only comment I'll add to that is a lot of these are gonna, have to sit around for a while during the day. So, things like casseroles that can be warmed up and kept cool, or things like pasta salads, things like that keep and are not, too bad if they get a little warmer. Things, those are also really good aspects for that. I did provide the to-go lunches last year, or the dinners for people. We did some chicken strips and chips and drinks and a few other things. I do have that written down. I forgot to send it to you, but if anybody wants to know kind of what we did, if you want to provide that as well, that's available. If you're uncertain about what food to bring, just let us know. We can give good
If
suggestions.
we could get like a couple of people that would do those to-go boxes for us on Sunday, that'd be great.
And I'll say the reason I did that is because we're going to talk about setting up shows and displays, and I know what it's really like when you are having to get everything at 4:30, 5 o'clock packed up into your car, get on the road. You barely have time to stop for gas and get going because you really need to get out there. So those are really lifesavers to make sure that people leave here comfortable and are sustained for their long trip that they have to head out.
And we're still unloading at that basement door, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the easiest. So if anybody is not familiar, that's a good point to bring up. Both loading and unloading from vehicles will be as you drive into the botanical gardens, you hit Jackson Center, you turn to the right, and immediately to your left, you kind of go down a ramp, and there's a basement door there that you can take around, and it takes an elevator straight up to the back side of the FAR auditorium, and we're going to be setting everything up. The request would be, if you are bringing stuff in and out of that facility, try and get in, unload your stuff, and get your car back out of there, because there'll be a lot of vehicles that'll be turned around. It's a big area, but we'll need to make sure it's free for people to get in and out the whole time.
And if anybody has any cart or any kind of a dolly or cart that we could use to haul boxes up, bring it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We'll talk about this for calling for display stuff too, but obviously we are going to be putting in our own show display. This is our home show. So we also want to make sure we're bringing in good quality plants and are putting on a good display for all of our local members. Amanda is going to be the point person for setting that up for our society this year. So we will be putting in a call for plants, but what I'm going to advocate for you is to be thinking about plants that you have. We really want to put on a good show for everything for it. And she's got some great ideas. As well as with that, if you have things that you feel are helpful, green foliage, stands or accents that kind of go with it. This is our 75th Jubilee, so the theme for that is kind of a diamond sort of theme. And so if you have any ideas along with that, you can forward them to Amanda, or bring stuff in and we can work out putting together a nice
Put all
display.
your loose diamonds on.
Somebody will be happy to put them on display for you.
The St. Louis exhibit
Huh?
will be
Yeah.
exhibit number 4.
Oh, yeah.
The what she was just bringing up, and one thing I brought in is that in the past we've given out diamond awards to people, which are not real diamonds, but they are these nice big like resin sort of diamonds that might be nice to put on display and have in with our show. So if you do happen to have those as members of the past, it would be nice to consider putting them out for them. They should be kind of on the display and kind of hidden. I doubt they're going to get walked off with. I assume if we needed to, we probably could get one replaced if it did disappear. But that's a nice way of putting in some gems with our display. Any other questions? I'll bring back to the point that she brought up, Janice brought up about judging in the morning for clerks. Again, it'll be groups of 4. It'll be split amongst AOS judges. So if you want to kind of help out with that, the different realms of that is that you can do both being a head clerk, where you're in charge of making sure we get through and hit all the plants and or stay organized. Then there's clerks that just help with making sure the ribbons get signed and placed on the right plants. And there's people that go in and pull plants or identify them so we can get through there. I'll hit on a little bit about the judging aspect of that, but it can be a little chaotic. So the clerks really do help keep us all organized. And so if you guys really want to see, how that's done, feel free to come in early that morning. The downside is that you have to show up early on Saturday. Any other questions related to the show? No? Okay. Those lists are going around. Don't forget to put them in there. And don't forget to take care of your T-shirts before we're done here. So what I'm going to talk about today is related to this. We wanted to keep it on theme, but because I've done a lot of displays over the... What was that? Oh, yes. I'm glad you asked about that. I meant to do it earlier. Nope, wrong ones. Oh, is that too dark for people? That's the one I like. Okay, cool. So, like I said, because I've put in several of the displays over the last year, I also recently did a review of AOS awards for the show trophy and displays. And what I thought I'd do is just kind of give you guys some insight. Eventually, I'm hoping, again, Amanda's taking it over this year, but other people will be looking at setting up displays. And I wanted to give some thoughts or ideas I had on ways to put in a good display and kind of trials and figuring things out as I've gone along here. So I do want to start off by at least distinguishing for people the difference between ribbon judging and AOS judging, or the show trophy that we put them in, that we talk about. While ribbon judging is done by the same AOS judges, it's during this section that we follow a separate show schedule. And specifically for us, the rules that govern that would be the Mid-America Orchid Congress. You guys have probably seen a little bit more about that in our newsletter recently. That's a group of organizations within the Mid-America region that have put together this schedule so that we all have shows that are conducted along the same rules and guidelines along the way. Other groups similar to that would be something like Schroga, or the Southwest Regional Orchid Growers Association. They have also their own separate show schedule that they follow. So when you travel between different shows in our region, they're all pretty much the same because we have the same show schedule that we use for all of them. And those are the rules that are governing ribbon judging. But we also typically judge plants and displays in parallel for this section. And that's because, again, the Mid-America Orchid Congress show schedule, as you see here, this is normally a list that we've sent out that we talked about. But here I've just done a pictogram for you and broken it out so that you can see that when we do this in parallel, we assign different judging groups to stuff like the exhibits, Cattleyas, Phalaenopsis, Dendrobiums, miscellaneous sections, and all of these judging groups judge all at the same time in parallel. And we do that for efficiency because we really only have 1 or 2 hours to get through all of the ribbon judging, and we have a lot of plants before a show opens up in the morning. That's why we start so early. But it's important to know that during this time, ribbons are given out, but in this section, the plants and the displays that are judged are only judged against the other plants and displays that are in that show. So this is a very show-specific process. Multiple ribbons and awards can be given out in each category, and those specifically for the display class would be things like the open class here, which has less than 25 square feet. This is for vendors and individuals. Less than 50 square foot displays, over 50 square foot displays, educational and artistic. And I had somebody talk to me about entering an artistic display or artistic component in here. This would be the category that you'd enter it in for your particular class. We then have categories of displays for societies only, which cover the 25 square foot, under 50 square foot, and over 50 square foot displays just for societies. And then there is actually an amateur category, which I don't think I've ever seen somebody enter, but an individual that consider themselves new to orchids can either enter a display that's less than or greater than 25 square feet on their own. So that is somewhat different than AOS and show trophy judging in that when we're doing this, we're instead following the rules and regulations set out by the American Orchid Society handbook on judging. And so for this type of display, we're typically also doing it, just as a note, before ribbons. Displays are scored first. And we do that actually to avoid bias, or what we tend to call ribbon counting, so that we don't actually go through as judges and just pick the display that has given the most ribbons for it. We're actually judging it on its own artistic merit and classifications for it. Then we do ribbon judging. And then the other aspect of AOS judging that kind of gets confused with this is after all of the ribbon judging, we come in and pull individual plants that we then judge against the national AOS database and all plants that have been judged within that. So this is important to understand that this is actually, you receive certificates and show trophies through the American Orchid Association, and you receive national recognition, but this is for posterity. This is for long term. Anything that goes in the AOS database is essentially out there for everybody to see long term. So it's a slightly different recognition, and that you're judging those displays and plants on their own merits and not based off what's in the show. So we tend to think of this as a little higher recognition in that this is the top of the top around there, but just recognize that's what it goes into. Here we do have multiple categories that we judge them against, but they're judged each on their own scorecard. And in this case, there's only one show trophy that's ever given out at a show, but there are multiple gold and silver certificates. So those other categories, again, would be the show trophy that's given out. Again, I want to point out that a show trophy is not always given out at an AOS sanctioned show. You do have to meet a minimum of 80 points on that scorecard or the show ballot that I'm going to talk about in a moment. And then anything that receives also a scorecard of 85 to 89 points will receive an additional silver or gold silver certificate, and anything that receives greater than 90 points on that show ballot will also receive a gold certificate. And so just to distinguish those. But while we're talking about displays, I also want to point out that there are other components that you can put in a display at any given AOS show. And those would be the educational exhibit, both for education and conservation. And also, before I get to that point, I brought up the point that so you guys know, and we've talked about this in our society before, if you get an AOS judge plant There are certain fees that are associated if you get an award with it for registering that in the system, sending you a certificate, and making sure all the photography and everything's handled around registering that plant. One thing that AOS has done is since 2025, there are no costs associated with registering an AOS exhibit award. Those would be the show trophy, as well as the gold, silver certificates, and all of these certificates that you can receive down here. And they did that because they wanted to encourage more people to put in exhibits and not have the cost be a hindrance to them. We do kind of offset that because when we put on a show, the society purchases the show trophy that goes with it, and there are some fees that are associated with that. Yeah?
Can we have an out of the area Orchid Society come and do a display at like our show?
Mm-hmm.
Do we charge them, or is that just a free space and we allot a certain space for that particular society?
Yep.
Okay, have you ever had a private individual do a display of just their own plants?
We have, I've done one in the past.
Or you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so if you have, the one thing I never want to encourage people is we as a society want to make sure we also put on a good display, but if you have enough plants to put on your own display, there's absolutely no reason you can't put on your own display with it. So as we just went over, the requirements are less than 25 square feet, but there's no minimum limit. So if you have something that's small, typically that's what's set aside. And if you were to, I'll elaborate on that. If you were to want to put in your own display, the way you would go about doing it is contact the show chair to make sure they know that they have space set aside for individuals to do that. If it's a really small display, one thing that you could accompany it with, if it's something that could fit on a portion of a table, you probably could come the day of and put it on the table for the artistic displays or the artistic components. But that would be something I would really advocate if you are planning to put in something significant to contact the show chair just to make sure a table is available for putting in a display ahead of time. Yeah.
Have you ever seen, or do you have an example of an educational exhibit?
Yeah, we're going to go through all of these right now. Yeah, that was what I meant to click on, but I just wanted to touch base on there's no cost associated with registering an AOS. So a good, some examples of some educational exhibits would be the few examples here. I do want to note that educational exhibits don't need to be large. They just need to be well arranged and focus on an educational aspect. So here on the left, you have an example from Florida that focuses on Florida natives. And this received a 90-point educational exhibit award. So it's also qualified for a gold certificate. As well as here on the right, and I'll point out that both of these are actually exhibits in the round. So they're on a round table. You can see them from all sides. And this is specifically focused on orchid conservation from Pennsylvania, looking at cypripediums, habenaria, different terrestrials that would be highlighted through educational conservation by this particular exhibit. And I think, a good aspects of these is they're lit really nicely. They have a nice ambiance to them, but they also recognize kind of where these naturally grow. And I think they're really informative for general people on how you might spot and be conservative or observant of the different components for each of these native areas. Did you have a point? So that's all the educational components I have. There are many other awards that are out there. Oftentimes people will put in poster board sort of educational aspects. I'll be quite honest, one of the things I would like to do is as a deconstructive sort of exhibit where you can actually interact and take apart different components of 3D printed orchids so that you could actually see how they're structured and do all that sort of stuff. It's a time sink to actually get something like that prepared ahead of the game. So eventually I'm hoping that that'll be available for anybody to
We did a how to care for orchids.
Yeah.
Probably maybe 5-6 years ago, and did it with a poster board and then had the different types of media so people could feel it and see what it was like. And
Yeah.
so.
And that's, I think, probably the most common thing that you see for an educational exhibit at a show. I do want to recognize I'm highlighting AOS awards here simply because that's what I have access to for pictures in the AOS database. And so this is a little more artistic aspect of an educational display. I think if anybody really wanted to put in an educational component within our show or in the future, that's something to really think about. And I think there's always new people to learn and pick up information off educational exhibits. So the other aspect or the next component would be the artistic certificate. And this is meant to highlight especially artistic arrangement of orchid plants. It's going to be different than the Certificate of Meritorious Arrangement, which is the final AOS category, in that this is a cut flower award, but this is really arrangement or organization of plants themselves. So some examples of this would be, as you see here on the left, where they've done a display that actually mimics J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth and the Shire, and more of a artistic floral representation of it. In the center here, you have this nice whirlwind of miniature orchids wrapped around a stone lantern. Again, pretty small display here, but really quite nicely done and elegant for it. And on the right, you actually see this is a single Dynama orchid that's actually grown on moss-covered branches, and then it's wrapped in this iron hoop here. And you can see here, these are nice miniature orchids, but it's a well-grown, well-manicured, beautiful plant that's, artistically displayed. So this is typically what we're aiming for an artistic certificate for a AOS display. I do want to give a note here that this is not meant to be an art award. As AOS judges, we do recognize we are not art critics, so we're not necessarily meant to critique art and award based off art itself. All we can recognize is particularly artistic representations or uses of orchids in displays. So while you might find some in the system that might be pieces of art, we really try and shy away from awarding artistic displays to pieces of art within AOS. However, that's the correction, is that in the ribbon system, there is an art section specifically judging orchid art. And then the last one will be the Certificate of Meritorious Arrangement, as I've just talked about. We talked this as a cut flower award. These are often built around this ikebana style of cut flowers, Japanese cut flower arrangements. But really, I think this award on the left is quite nice, where it shows more of an artistic arrangement of cut flowers. You can have whole plants in a CMA, but the goal here is really to focus on arranging and setting out orchid flowers so that they produce kind of an artistic representation. This is separate from a display that's meant to showcase a well-grown orchid and its bloom. Here you're just focusing on the blooms themselves. So there have only been 47 of these ever given in the 37 years that this award has been out there. So they don't happen very often. And I will say, while this ikebana is quite beautiful and I think is a great representation of it, standards do increase over time with AOS awards, and it's not likely that a single bloom or inflorescence of an orchid would receive such a high CMA cut flower award moving forward. But it is something to keep in mind that if you have an inflorescence that breaks off, or if you have flowers that you want to cut and put together as an arrangement, there are categories for entering those for judging, both within the AOS system, but also in ribbon judging. So while I did just highlight the differences between ribbon judging and AOS judging, it's important to note that they all essentially are judged for judging for displays in the exact same show. So while they do have some significant overlaps, I want to highlight what's similar between putting together a good display. So I'm just using, in this case, the show trophy ballot to highlight kind of the key aspects as judges that we find in displays so that you can better understand how we break them down and kind of rank or score them. So we're going to start off with design, which is roughly, it's over a third of the points on the show ballot overall. And it's focused primarily around different aspects of the principles of design. So if you're not familiar, oftentimes when people are talking about artistic design, they talk about both the elements of design and the principles of design. And I think for a novice, art critic, it's sometimes hard to understand what the differences of these are. It is the principles of design that we are scoring on. But if you look at the two together, the elements are the the basis of which the principles are composed, and then these principles are the methods in which designs are organized. So to further explain this, each element can be applied to any of the given principles here. So you can have contrasts of color, size, shape, but you can also have different balance of color, texture, or pattern. And so if you take this a little further, I like to think of the elements as your toolbox to putting together a display, but the principles as your instructions or your blueprint for constructing a good display. So that's just kind of a simple breakdown for as we address these here, and I'll go through examples of each of these throughout. But I do often find that there are a few specific elements that tend to be the most important when I'm putting together a display to focus on. And again, these would be applying them both to balance, dominance, contrast, proportion, rhythm, and scale. So I'm going to talk about the elements because that's the tools I use, but I'm going to talk about them in terms of the principles of the design, how they actually go together to make a complete design. And the first would actually be color. Oftentimes, color can be one of your limiting factors in organizing and understanding how to get displays to flow together. The next would be size of your plants and orchids. And the last would really be the form or the shape of your orchids. And so it's these components that usually most often we're working with to construct our designs or our displays that we put out there. So the first design element that most people actually focus on in putting together a display is color flow. And this is because when you focus on a grouping of plants based on their color, here you can see red mixes to maybe an orangish red, into yellows, into whites, into purples, and pinks down here. That's what we generally refer to as a nice color flow. And if you compare this to an example of a very blotchy color, it can be a little bit harsh on the eyes. Now, this is actually not fair to this photo because if you look at the individual plants in here, there is a good color flow. But what I'm actually using is the fact that you have these blue and red ribbons kind of interspersed throughout to highlight the fact that this stark blotches of color actually throw off your eye when you're trying to guide it through a display. The reason why I couldn't find a better photo is all of these are AOS show trophies, so they naturally are pretty well composed. But this is a good example to kind of trick your eye to show the difference between how color flow actually works. So in my opinion, I first designed for color flow. When you're trying to unpack all of your orchids, it's really easy to look at the different colors that you have and start arranging them so you can kind of build your template for how you might actually put together and arrange your display. One note on this is you also rarely have blue orchids. It's just not a very common color for orchids to naturally have in them. So I've kind of graded out here. And white as a color generally is pretty neutral and is found in a lot of orchids. So it can actually be mixed in throughout a color flow display in and of itself. And when I put together this, this diagram, I also put green in here, both as its own color, but also throughout, because I want people to recognize that green is part of the natural vegetative growth of an orchid. And so you're typically going to see this all throughout a display. It kind of unifies everything. But the next thing I actually would focus on is managing the different sizes and shapes of your display, as well as the different forms that come with them. And when you break this down a bit, you can see how what are arguably was a good display to begin with can be somewhat rearranged to have a little bit more harmonious contrast or balance between all the different components that is. So I'm going to focus the rest of this on individual design components, but those are the three that I would typically recommend as good starting points for people to kind of put together a display. So one of the main aspects of the principles of design that we talked about is balance. I want to point out that balance doesn't mean necessarily symmetry. On the left, you can see that you have these different blocks of color with the white and the red, but you also have this large phylogeny on top, which is balanced with smaller groups or groups of smaller plants on the bottom to help balance overall proportions within this display. So it's a good way. This is vertically symmetric, but you can notice that the balance here can be offset to provide a contrast or working together of different sizes of plants. Similarly, on the right, you can actually see that they're pushing the balance of design a little bit by putting this rather large cymbidium in the upper right-hand corner to kind of offset everything. But if you do look at this is actually hidden by the feeling golden. It's actually kind of a golden ratio sort of structure that actually helps you unbalance the eye, but you find it appealing because it's a natural rhythm that we find in design. So I do want to point out that while I do find design rules such as the golden ratio or the rule of thirds, where you place interesting aspects on the cross sections of these areas, not so great to be a tool to design towards. They really help us break down what natural design aspects we actually find appealing to our eye. So when I overlay it on a design, it really makes sense. But when I'm trying to put together a display, I'm not measuring things out, nor do I know exactly where it's going to end up. So what a better rule I would just say is do what's more appealing to your eye and leave kind of these strong rules to the critics that are actually going to break it down later on. So that's pointing out that here, where you can see, these components actually are balanced as we break them down, but it's not super efficient to do this in real time. But I will point out dominance here using the previous image that I've worked with and a new one here. On the left, you can actually see that, again, a single plant, which might be overpowering because it's centered high up and out of the way. You're actually getting a better look at all of these plants here. But on the right, you're actually using dominance to actually offset. It's a way of actually pushing that boundary a little bit by taking and putting this bonsai effect with these rather large, they're well-grown Phalaenopsis groupings here, but by putting them up on a bonsai, your eye is actually drawn towards them. Now again, we pointed out there are design principles that are help keeping this still harmonious, but you can actually use dominance to draw attention. If these were put down in here, they might actually get lost in with the other plants. And so if there's something particularly well-grown you want to draw attention to, you can use the principle of dominance to offset a little bit. But I want to point out dominance is not always great. Here on the left, I would actually argue the dominant aspect of this image is the background. Your flowers are far too small in comparison to the pedestals that they're placed on here, and you actually are losing the main aspect of your artistic display. Similarly, on the right here, they're trying to use that same bonsai sort of feeling where they're highlighting the brassavolas on the top. But one of the main things that happens here is with this rather large obstruction of a bamboo orchid that's not incredibly well floriferous, it throws off that balance. And so this is probably a way that sort of highlighting with a dominant feature is actually kind of unbalancing itself and distracting. Now, it might be noted that this possibly could be an image in the round and that you actually are seeing maybe just a bad photo of it from a different angle. But I think that's also to drive home the point that you should be looking at your display from all different angles, because someone's not going to enter a room from one side and look at it just straight on. You want to make sure that you actually have a nice harmonious flow all around it. That is part of the reason why we put things up against the wall, because then you can control just 180 versus all the way 360 around it. But then you can also look at contrast. And in this case, a similar thing has been done by driving it to the extreme. So you can take this high contrast yellow Anciella africana, both for its color, its size, its shape, and its form, to kind of borderline put this off balance. But it's actually might be a good way of managing an extremely large plant on a display. Instead of trying to put it off to the side over here and build something around it, they're highlighting it. And because this is vertically displayed, it actually helps to emphasize the sheer size of this well-grown central focal plant. The overall goal, though, is that you don't want to be able to have it so your eye can't come down and appreciate the rest of the orchids that are also in the display. So at this point, it might be a good time to also draw attention to the second aspect of the scorecard, which is that quality actually is equal to design in the AOS judging system, but also just when we represent or score or look at displays. So quality typically is impact, but it also often translates to size. So one thing I want to ask people, especially in our local society display, is that large, well-grown plants, what they might be cumbersome to take to and from a show, they do provide a large impact when you're trying to give that overall feel for a display. And often the displays you're going to see tonight have really well large grown plants in them because it gives an impact of quality to the overall design itself. So here's a good example. This display is well over 50 square feet. You can see you have really large, well-grown noble dendrobiums. You have large cattleyas, brassivolas up here. And this is a way that they've gotten really high scoring on the quality of their plants because they're able to have all of those. I will maybe bring up the fact that this spacing in here for me, because you have large chunks of plants, might be a little off. So while they're trying to achieve good placement of these by having the smaller flowers up here and clusters of them at eye level, really they're benefiting by the quality and variety of their plants when they've got a good score on this, rather than the cohesiveness of bringing all of these together in a display. You do want to bring things a little bit tighter in so that it looks a little more cohesive of a design. And that's to bring up the point that you should optimize space. But there also is a second extreme of that, in that you can make it too cramped. So this is actually a 4 tabletop display. So this is actually a really large display. And you have some really well-grown large orchids in here. But one thing into my eye that this overall does, because all of these plants are kind of heaped into the center, you're not really able to separate them apart from each other. It's hard to really appreciate the quality of flowers and the quality of plants that are going on in there. So what I do actually ask for people is that you give individual plants their room. So you don't want to have them too spread apart so it's not a cohesive picture, but you also don't want to have them jumbled in on top of each other, because it's really hard then to notice, especially if you have some sort of a smaller plant in here, it's separate from everything else that's out there. So that's, I think, an important aspect of design. Another would be rhythm. Oh, sorry. Yeah?
Back to that.
Mhm.
So what happens if, as a society, we always get a lot of plants and we don't do cuts? How do you work with that, knowing, like, you want to give things
This is a hard aspect. That's probably the biggest thing. I think, to me, if you have your own display and you're putting it in there, you know everything that's going to go in ahead of time. You can kind of arrange it. Society displays are hard because you have to work with what you're given. The way I usually accomplish trying to give them size and space is things that I've talked about already. I don't put small plants down really far away from the eye. If it's something that's hanging or smaller, I try and bring it up to eye level where everybody's going to be at. That might mean putting a pedestal on it. It gives it a little bit more weight to draw your eye towards it. But then also usually that has a little more natural foliage, so I can kind of blend that in with the other greenery and plants that are around. The point that you brought up, though, and this is what I try and emphasize to people when I take stuff out for display, is that there might be a point at which we're putting together a display and I do have to cut a plant. And that's just because there might be some other 12 other plants that we have of the exact same species or groupings of it, and it's unfortunately not the biggest and showiest of the display. And so while we do want to always make sure we're giving everybody their night or the day in the sun here, if we're going to put together a cohesive display, sometimes we have to take smaller plants and kind of set them aside and not actually officially put them into display. So never take it personally if that happens. Never be discouraged from putting in your own miniature orchids, because they do have a proportion for it. But understand that when you have to put together a display for a society, there are judgment calls that have to be made for that, and it's never a personal thing. Components of this would then be, the next component would be rhythm, or using repetition or variation of elements to create visual flow and movement. In here you can see that we have Cattleya and epidendrums on the left here, which are combined with kind of artistic elements to create more of a flow of this design. Kind of looks like wind or water or things, kind of creating that dynamic structure with them. This is similarly accomplished with actually a much smaller display on the right, where you're spacing out the plants, but you have kind of this rhythmic placement for them that also has a significant flow to that design. So that's some things to keep in mind. Again, they're highlighting the vertical aspect or the structure or shape of these to create that flow, but still giving some space in between so they can see them. Similarly here, I actually like this really super large display where, again, you've gone with color flow, unifying the colors along the way. But to me, honestly, this almost looks like, because they're lifted off the ground, looks like bars in a musical notes, that you kind of have these nice punctations of color and aspects all along the way that I think has a nice little rhythm to it. The opposite of that would be something here where you're trying to group together similar plants, but these long vertical structures, I think, actually detract from the eye. They kind of are creating these blocky sort of features that don't really allow you to flow through the design. Your eye tends to get stuck on these big groups and you don't notice these other plants in the background and around. So that's the way that rhythm can kind of work against you a little bit. And at this point, the last component that might be important to bring up would be the variety of your plants. Usually we achieve this variety in a display through many different genera in orchids, and you're often seeing that in a lot of the displays. So we saw this before, where you have cattleyas, dendrobiums, brassavolas, you have paphs and frags down here. I think there's a lycast in here as well. When we're judging, we do go through and look at the different types of genera that are present in that. But I do want to point out that you don't always have to have a large number of genera on display. You can actually achieve the same thing through using a single genus of Barkeria here, but you're actually now using color and arrangement to help create that little more of a dynamic, interesting display for it. So this actually got an artistic award at our show last year. It's completely acceptable to have something where you're focused around one specific genus. These are all really well-grown plants. They have that quality aspect. And the diversity in this case, variety that's brought in is the color, and they have a nice flow to them. So they have a good rhythm. All of those aspects that we focused on before. The other thing to note, and this is actually the final component of the principles of design, would be the scale. So oftentimes, when we're looking at displays on the internet, we're seeing things like this. This is from, I'm pretty sure, the Taiwan International Orchid Show, where they have the ability to grow these giant bushels of Phalaenopsis. And well, I think it's almost all Phalaenopsis. There might be some epidendrums or something in here. But what we're seeing here with scale, this is still harmonious because they take in these giant plants and they put them on these giant tree branches in this giant exhibit. So it still is balanced. It has good flow through it. You're keeping pretty good color flow through with everything. But I want to highlight on the right, you can do the exact same thing with miniature orchids. This is a tiny display where they've actually had a nice small scale where you can really highlight and point out these beautiful little miniature orchids in less than half of a tabletop. So you can still have good principles of design if you balance your scale proportionally with these tiny little plants. And I think this is totally doable. We have a lot of people that grow miniatures in here. This is an aspect that you could focus on for that. And you could probably, again, put in your own display just focused on these miniatures because you've balanced the scale appropriately to focus on it. So one of the things I do want to just give it a little bit of time to is I do think there is some interesting aspects of display that have been recently showing up in Montreal's shows where they've started to perfect this orchid in the round aspect. They're building these giant columns that can be viewed from all around. And what they are doing, you're giving space to the orchids, but they're pulling things up and they're highlighting them in a way that is very artistic, but also still represents or respects the quality of each of these plants in here. Now, these are pretty tall structures, so these are still pretty well-grown plants themselves, but it's something really interesting that they're doing. And again, one of the things they're doing is they're putting smaller orchids up towards the top where you can actually see them at eye level, and they're putting the bigger, larger orchids off to different sections where they're a little further away from the eye, but it creates a balance and still harmony between all of them.
What is that black thing?
I honestly don't know. This one is their latest one. They've taken a little bit too far in terms of artistic style here. To me, it looks like a spaceship or like a bottom of a rubber tire, but Could also be a planter that they're putting in there. I don't know if it was a record theme, but I didn't read that in the description. So this is not the best aspect. I think their previous ones have a nice artistic representation. But again, this is getting away from the aspect where we don't have to have everything on a flat table. That's the easiest and most straightforward way for us to put together a display. If you're really adventurous, this takes a little bit more of a structure and preparation ahead of time to be able to take orchids and put them in this more vertical aspect. So the last thing I would be a little bit remiss if I didn't discuss, because it is still an aspect of scoring, is labeling of your plants. And I don't think it should be overlooked. It's only 10 points, still 10-point difference if you're really going for a show trophy and you want to get all of those points awarded to you. But I think that, in my opinion, the best way to focus on putting together labeling would be that you're adding to the display and you're highlighting the educational aspect of the species and the grex while you're avoiding from detracting the overall background of the design. So I think because of this, the labels must be clear and legible. They must be on good contrast, either white on black in this case or black on white, so you can very clearly see them and read them. But the inclusion criteria I recommend for all labeling would be that you have a name of the orchid species or the grex, the hybrid that's present for it. Ideally, you'd also have any cultivar names or varietal forms with it, and those likely should accompany any of the awards that they've been given so that people can fully identify their plants. And then the last thing would be, if it's a species, I recommend that you give a geographical region where this typically could be found. And hybrids, I recommend that you give the parents that went into them. Yeah?
Do you have a font size?
I don't know if I have a specific font size. I try and fill as much as you can without it being too obnoxious for it. We tend to print out.
Possible to fit on the.
Yeah. Now, the way we've done this, and I'll just say for our society in the past several years, is that we print out a business size card, and on that we print on 3/4 inch clear tape. So they're black with white on it, and we try and fill that entire area to kind of give good contrast. Now, we all get older, our eyesight's getting worse and worse, so you do sometimes have to get pretty close to read all of those, especially if there's a lot of information on it. But you know, if it's really there, you can read it. I would recommend your name of your plant being the largest component of all of that there if you can control it. But it is important. Again, this is an educational aspect we put on for displays. So a few other just notes I want to bring up is to point out that black is neutral. There's a reason why you see black as a background and on all of our components. If you just take some plants here, I just put these together of what I had in bloom. You can see there's a lot of detraction that comes into play from the fact that you see all of the pots in here. I was going to show my background busy without a background on it, but you don't want to see my dirty house, so you just get a black background here. But you can see that just simply by putting some black on it, you're highlighting all of those extraneous components. You're meant to just focus on the plants and the flowers themselves. And so I would highly recommend this, and it's almost ubiquitous when people put it in displays. Take the extra time to really separate those. Same thing actually goes for if you're taking photographs of your orchids. If you can put it on a background, wrap these around. This is why I have this here. I take all of my photographs in front of a little trifold component here so I can just see the flower itself. I'm not distracted by other greenery or other things behind it. The other component is lighting. So I'm not going to emphasize this too much right now, but you can see how, especially for some sort of miniature or small orchids, if you can just get a little more lighting on it, you can really appreciate the quality of that flower. And so I've actually put together for our society some new grow light little lights that can be focused around and focus in on the plants themselves. I probably will send out in a newsletter for other societies to put that together, but lighting is important. It can be one of the most overlooked aspects. Even in a well-lit room, sometimes you really can't see when you have all of these plants hanging over all the aspects of the plants you want to show off. And then just to kind of leave you guys with some teasers here, these are the Walter Off Exhibit Awards. These only have been given out for 10 years now. But this is amongst the judges and all the exhibits that were awarded every single year. One gets voted on by the judges and gets highlighted. And so you can see This was the one from 2023. Very beautifully well grown, evenly spaced out, but you're giving presence and space to all of those different plants. Color flow, is not super off here, but again, it's just a very well grown, beautiful plant. This was what was on my title screen just because they've used a lot of props in here. It's borderline distracting because you want to make sure you're really focusing on the plant, but given the sheer size of this exhibit, really it's just the structure that they're placing their orchids on, and you can get up and actually see all of these wonderful orchids growing on it here. This is an example where it's not really a hugely large display. There's probably a good 30 plants in this display. Still very well grown, but they're spaced out and have a nice rhythm and artistic merit to them themselves. This is a bigger one. This was in Maryland, again, where you can walk through. You have a lot of greenery and more of a natural cascade of orchids coming out of it. And ultimately, too, actually, the educational exhibit that I highlighted earlier, it does have educational boards behind it, but I think the central aspect is really that artistic view that really is quite elegant and beautiful. So in conclusion, what I did want to highlight for everybody is to understand the principles of design. Again, not all of these have to be used. There are different design elements. They're different than the design elements. But to me, my recommendations would be first design for color flow, look at the balance of the size and shape of your plants, and then optimize spacing of those plants, give everything room proportionally. Understand that design does equal quality of flowers, so you want to have very well-grown plants if you can for it. Variety is also commonly achieved through multiple genera. So if you can bring a diverse variety of plants in a display, that's all the better. I think labeling is a requirement, but it's also a point scorer for yourself. Lighting and having black as kind of your neutral color is what I would say are my key takeaways for really getting the best quality display that's out there for it. I do want to hit on quickly, just so you guys understand why we show orchids. I think the goal here, I've talked about this a lot, our goal is to make it dynamic, but also have an educational aspect of it. Most people that are coming to the show are not orchid growers that are there. They're interested in the hobby. They want to see about it. It's nice for them to be able to see all these different diverse genera and types of orchids that we can provide to them. It's also important to highlight just variations in style. I grow orchids different than Albert grows orchids in New Mexico. We argue over this all the time, but each of us have our own merits. Each of us grows certain things better. So it's really nice to make sure you're bringing in your orchids just to show off what you're doing. You might not think it's the best thing, but I guarantee somebody appreciates it out there and really struggles with whatever you're growing really well. And you might take for advantage, but it also creates dialogue. I think the important aspect, a lot of the things that we grow and have shown that I've been the most surprised by is some orchid that we purchased. I didn't realize how rare it is, and people really are super excited for it. So please make sure that we're continuing to express this knowledge and experience for people. I do not know how much time we really want to take, but I did talk about how we would go about submitting plants. If you're going to have things that could possibly in bloom for the show, it is not a requirement that you let us know ahead of time for our display. But the more we can plan a little bit, the easier it is to kind of know how much space we're going to have or how little space we're going to have and how much structure we need to build to kind of put that on there. So what I did want to click on here, I'm just going to, nope, there we go. Why will this not let me? Well, I was going to show you. There we go. What we typically send out. This doesn't be the only way you can submit information, but it's easiest for us in terms of this plant submission process. Again, we will send this out in an email, hopefully, for people to look it up and submit plants before the end of January, preferably by the Sunday at least before. There are instructions on kind of how to follow through this process. The important thing would be, this is where I was talking about, there is a show schedule. I don't know that this is the most recent version of our show schedule. I just have to update the link. It will be updated by the end of the evening. But you can see through the different timelines. We'll just put the entire show schedule up there so you know what the time and date of everything is, but also which category your orchid falls into. On this here, we also have the cheat sheet that I made in case you don't want to read through 10 pages of, it's only 7 pages, but 7 pages of text. There's a brief overview. You can kind of look for what type of orchid you might have and then kind of highlight which category it might go into. I would still check with the show schedule and make sure that it matches specifically what you're going to enter it in. Yes?
If you've got a particularly weird plant, is there anybody that or whoever could ask, where does this plant go in the scheme of things?
I think any of the judges are more than happy to. Any of the experienced growers are also more than happy to. It's most likely going to go into miscellaneous if it's something that's not well seen. Yeah?
The people who are doing the registration. for
Yes.
mental health, and they have some reference material there at the registration desk.
Okay.
That can point you in the direction you need to go for a class of your plant.
And
And that'd be Mitzi and Carol Bravens and Kathy.
Oh, right, okay, cool.
yeah.
The one thing I will say, one of the biggest questions comes in with paphiopedilums
Mm-hmm.
and the color.
Yeah.
And we get so many questions about that. What we normally will tell people is if we see a judge, ask the judge, because there's different classes and you put it, our judges are usually very good about this.
Yeah.
If it's in the wrong class and they have not yet judged that class, they will move it down. So if it's like 40 to 45, I'm just picking numbers. You put it in the lowest class, like 40, because the judges can always move it down to 44 or 45. But once a class has been judged, they cannot move your plant upwards because it's already been done. So keep that in mind, and like I said, the biggest questions are always with the paths and the colors.
Yeah, and that's a good point. But a lot of these, this is why this graphic is not comprehensive, because it's really hard to encompass certain things like cypripediums or the paphs and frags. Usually we go by species first, and it's whether or not it normally has one flower or it's multifloral. So you have to have little knowledge about its growth habit. Then you go in the hybrids, you go by color. Usually, if it's multifloral, it's going to be there, but then you have color going into it. And I think that's a really good aspect to highlight. That is the advice even as judges that we give. It's going to be the dominant color that's there. Typically, that's the pouch of a paph. But that may not always be the aspect of it. However, if we look at a group, like she just said, if it's in one category, we'll move it to another category. And especially too, there's sometimes where we're looking, we have 100 of all one thing in this category. It's prudent for us to take some stuff out there so we can make better decisions and compare smaller groups of higher quality orchids, and we'll move them to another category that they also fit into. But we can only move downwards. We can't go back and rejudge, open up judging again. We'd be there all day. It would cause total chaos. So that's a good rule in general when you're looking at your categories, even for things like Cattleyas. If you're not sure, it has some Garanthe in it, but it's not, this is, Cattleya and Garanthe species. 4 inches or less, larger than 4 inches. If it's on that cusp, put it in the smaller one. If we need to, we'll move it into the larger one. So we'll always go downwards, but we won't really go upwards for it. So that's a really good aspect of it. And you don't have to, we are asking when you look at submitting plants, you're going to put your name, your email in here, the plant it is, the parents, just so, if we need to figure out specifically about it, that helps you identify if it's a species or if it has hybrids for it, color and size, and then really this class for judging. If you leave that blank, it's not the end of the world. The goal for us to submit this form is so that we can make sure we understand which plants are going to go there. But also typically we use these forms in the collection of information, one, to know that we're not missing plants. We've had people show up later arguably because they had something they had to be doing, but we knew to leave some space because this plant is going to come in and we know it's a cattleya, it's going to be a little bit larger, or it's a tiny little dendrobium, we can fit it in somewhere. So we use it to guide when and where we're going to place things. And then we do create the labels if we can ahead of time because it takes time to prep all of that sort of stuff. So if we know where it's going to go into it, we have all this information which goes on the labels, we can prep all of those also. The class is the last thing that you have to make sure is correct, and that'll happen at the registration table. So if you don't get it in on this list ahead of time, you can always correct it there. And that just goes on these tiny little forms. So we don't need any of that class for putting together a display, just for making sure you are ready and organized. And if you know your class ahead of time, it saves them a little bit of a nightmare when they're trying to register 500, probably more plants in an afternoon. If you have all of those tags ready, which is why Lynette brought some of them, if you know you're going to bring in plants for the show, you can take these, fill them out, have them ready. We do ask that you get not a vendor number, exhibitor number so that all of your plants go together under that same, it's a letter that goes in with it. Yeah.
What is easier when you're putting together a display? Do you want the plants ahead of time or do you want them brought in day of?
For this particular display, it's going to be easier, frankly, to put them in day of. The downside for that is that it's Friday morning. We need them there between 9, noon at the latest, because you really have to be able to plan your display, and you only have 5 other hours to finish that off. So noon at the latest. If you can't get it in there in that morning window, that's when we really want to work with you to make sure you can hand it off to somebody else that can bring it in for us on Friday morning, or we can pick it up from you and make sure it gets there on time. The other thing to bring up is if you, I'm talking about you guys putting in a list and populating this information for us now, things can always be pulled out. It's harder for us to adjust, especially if we have bigger plants again, or we need to plan around certain things if we don't know that it's coming at all. If the blooms drop off, especially paphs and frags, they're notorious for that. It'll drop off the morning of and you have no idea. We can always pull it out of there. Until it's registered, there's no real hiatus to that. It's just giving us a heads up for this. So if you think, usually when I put in my plants here, I just go through my cabinets and I see, oh, this is coming into bloom, this is probably going to be there. And then we can just let people know, this is what actually came in that day of.
Very important that the larger your orchids, we sign those up.
Yeah.
So we can make space, and if you're gonna be late, let us know ahead of time, but if you've got a large orchid, at least bring it early.
Define a large orchid.
I'd say anything like an 8-inch pot or bigger. They just are tend to have bigger flowers, are going to be, bigger foliage. That's something that's going to be impactful size that we need to make sure we manage space for.
And that color of the flower,
Yeah.
if possible, so you can, release space.
Yeah.
Do you want a photograph on it with the form?
We don't have the ability to submit it on the form, but information is on here if you want to send an email to people. Yeah. I think the more planning ahead of time, always the better. More communication is always appreciated. Start planning now. Start thinking about what plants you're going to get in there. The only other aspects I do want to emphasize in my presentation was how do you prepare your plant for bringing them in. That is that, one, hydrate prior to traveling. We're going to be at a show. They don't have to travel as far. It's just going to be over the weekend. But some plants are impacted by 3 days of going to be drier air that they're experiencing. So please make sure you do that. If it is something that needs to be sprayed, let us know ahead of time so we can make sure we'll have spray bottles. But we're not going to have a time to go through and spray an entire display every morning. So if it needs special attention, just let us know. We'll make sure it gets spruced every day. The other thing, safe transport. Again, not going across the state or anything like that, but you do have to bring it from your home to us. So that requires sometimes making sure that it's strapped in. I put them in boxes usually with padding around them. I'm not afraid of taking my seatbelt and actually strapping a lot of them down or putting something in so that it stays so it doesn't rock over, because you never know when you're going to hit a bump and it's going to go tumbling over off your chair. So make sure you're packaged for travel. Also, please label your plants. We're going to put black labels or the labels for the display on them separately, but it's nice to know the information that's there because not everybody that's putting in the display is going to be helping out, is going to know all of these species and be able to say, oh, that's this plant that this label needs to go on. So if you can put that with it. Also, it helps to make sure if it's on the pot, we know who it goes back to when it's a hot mess of 4:30 in the afternoon and we got to get all of our plants torn down and given back to people. I will say tags, almost always those little pull tags are probably going to get pulled out and either put in your pot or put under the pot. If you're worried about that, pull them ahead of time and just put in a label or like tape it to the pot or something like that. I don't think we've had too many tags that have gone missing from putting in a display, but they do need to come out when we go to wrap the pots. So keep that in mind if you're concerned about it. We talked about all of the categories and classes, but also then check your plant condition. That means staking or securing your inflorescences. Again, for transport, because they're easy to get knocked and get pulled right off of there, but also for proper presentation. You want to make sure your flower is where you want the judges to see it so they can actually highlight all the important aspects and the good quality of it. You want to remove any damaged vegetation to it, any leaves that are starting to look a little bit rough. Doesn't mean if the tip is a little bit brown, it's the end of the world. I don't personally, when I put in a display, feel comfortable cutting other people's plants, but oftentimes, frankly, if I have a plant that has a little bit of browning on the tip, I'll just take a razor blade and kind of shave off that edge. It's a natural way of making it look green again, but also not destroying the entire leaf that it's going to grow with. So that's some things you can do. But really the big hang off, half brown sort of leaves, those will detract a little bit if you could cut those off ahead of time. But also please check for pests. We all get them. There's no shame in it, but we don't want to spread them to everybody else. So if you can spray your plants, if you spray for them, just do a good thorough job to make sure that we're not bringing any unwanted travelers into the show with everybody else. So with that, any other questions? Sorry, this is a long presentation, but hopefully it was educational for you. Cool. Don't forget to get your shirts here. Don't forget to sign up before we leave. We still need to do voting. We'll have a few minutes and